Just wanted to thank so many of you for coming today to Bathurst. I think it's a great sign to see so many people from industry coming to participate in this event. In regional New South Wales, through the Fast Rail program, we're certainly very big advocates for improving regional transport, particularly for our country customers. So it's great that you're all here, and many of you experienced the lovely but scenic train trip yesterday from Sydney to Bathurst. So as indicated, my name's Graham Nelms. I'm the Director for Fast Rail within Transport for New South Wales. We've been working on Fast Rail for about 2 years now, working with our colleagues across not just the transport cluster, but also across New South Wales Government as well as the Australian Government as well, so partnering with them on a number of different initiatives. And a big focus for us is not just looking at the individual corridors and what we can offer for the future for each corridor, but also look at developing a fast rail strategy for New South Wales. That's, as Paul Toole, the Minister for Regional Transport and Roads, indicated earlier, the Premier announced the development of a strategy back in December 2018, and that strategy is due to be completed by the end of this year. So part of that strategy involves working alongside Professor Andrew McNaughton, who I'm sure many of you will know, and working with him to ensure that we develop a strategy that not just identifies where routes may be or where stations may be, but actually tries to articulate it in a way that supports the broader objectives for regional New South Wales that we're looking to achieve. So we're working through the strategic phase at the moment, and there's a very clear commitment to take the strategic work that we're doing at the moment from strategy to planning and then delivery. And many of the commitments that Paul Toole mentioned are very much part of that. So Melissa will step you through how we're doing things differently and some of the technical challenges that we're working through. But I just wanted to really just touch on some of the strategic thinking that we do, and rather than necessarily get into the detail, really explain why we want to cover that country mile faster than what we do today. There we go. So Fast Rail is really a key component for our vision for regional New South Wales. New South Wales is set to grow from 8 million people today to about 12 million in about 40 years' time by 2056. Much of that growth will actually happen within Sydney, in Greater Sydney, and what we want to do is try to encourage as much growth as possible to happen in regional New South Wales. We know that our regions are very keen to draw in more investment. They have the capacity for growth. They're very keen to see that growth happen in their areas. They're keen to attract more job opportunities and very keen to attract more skilled workers. And that's really building off what is Australia's largest and most diverse regional economy. And what we want to do is leverage off the respective engine industries. So not just necessarily seeing population growth and population serving jobs like retail and education, but actually leverage off the engine industries that really grow from the comparative advantages of each of our regions. But the key to unlocking that growth and realising that potential is connectivity across the state. So we want to look at connectivity between our regional centres, our cities, and our international gateways. So connecting New South Wales, connectivity is the key across the state, and not just necessarily connecting back to Sydney. A third of our population live outside Sydney, but unfortunately our transport networks have traditionally, as we've heard earlier, typically radiate out from Greater Sydney and focus on connecting customers and communities back to Sydney. What we want to do is change that. We want to change as the needs of our regional customers and communities have changed. And the most effective way of doing that is through the development of a hub and spoke network across New South Wales. And that means what we want to do is leverage the investment that's already happened in those regional centres around health education, meaning that many people no longer have to travel to Sydney to get the services they need. They can travel to their local regional city. So they play a very important role across our state, and we want to leverage off that. And many of these cities and centres have now become cities and hubs in their own right, connected to the state and national significant networks. What Fast Rail will attempt to do is really take this a step further and better connect our regional cities and centres and gateways and start to bring people and our businesses closer together. So that faster and easier travel between our economic hubs will enable greater opportunities for our regions and help reduce the disadvantage that we currently have in many of our places. But we also want to look beyond the network itself and use that hub and spoke network to spread and expand the benefits beyond the fast rail network. So we want to make sure that upgrades to local transport networks like improved bus services and even on-demand play a role to play in bringing people to those hubs and then connecting them to their nearest cities and onto adjoining centres. So we've started to look at a number of routes across New South Wales. So we've identified 4 that connect the state's largest and most productive centres and cities as a starting point for our fast rail investigations. These are, as you can see on the map, a northern corridor to Port Macquarie via the Central Coast and Newcastle, to the west and Central West via Parkes, Bathurst and Orange, down to a Canberra via Goulburn on a southern inland corridor and a southern coastal corridor to Nowra and Wollongong. So many of you will probably appreciate that these corridors are typically today characterised by fairly steep grades, tight curves, slow journey times, as well as shared infrastructure with between freight and passenger. That essentially means it's very difficult. While we might have trains that could do 160 kilometres an hour in our fleet, there's very little opportunity on those routes to operate at those speeds. Some of you probably would have experienced or noted that yesterday in travelling from Sydney to Bathurst at an average speed of about 60 kilometres an hour, while the trains that currently operate that section, the XPT particularly, can do 160. What we want to do is start to change that. So we've already started some investigations on these routes, on these corridors, starting with the Northern Corridor, where we've prepared a strategic business case in partnership with the Commonwealth Government, and that considers a range of different fast rail options between Sydney and Newcastle. That's nearing completion, and we're hoping that will be considered by the New South Wales and Australian governments in the coming months. To complement that, we've also started early planning and investigations on each of the other corridors as well. And what that work is doing is considering options such as track straightening, passing loops, deviations, new lines on each of the routes to see what are the range of possibilities before we can start to get into detailed planning and work, business case work, which we anticipate will commence from next year. A lot of that work will also involve working much more collaboratively and closely, not just within New South Wales Government, but with the newly established National Faster Rail Agency, which was established in July this year. So in terms of shaping the vision and really understanding the why fast rail for New South Wales, and what are those broader outcomes and objectives that we're looking to achieve? So by now, hopefully you've started to understand that we're actually looking at this quite differently, and Melissa will certainly go in through that in much more detail. But unlike previous studies that have typically considered longer distance high-speed rail, we want to look at how fast rail or higher speed rail could actually benefit our regions within New South Wales. So not necessarily looking at high speed between our capital cities, but looking at faster rail between our larger regional cities. So typically past studies have usually focused on how rail could be a competitor to air and road rather than a catalyst for regional economic growth. So unlike past studies, we're actually looking at this quite differently. The first up, is around really growing our regional economies. So we want to promote that growth, and until now, really limited work has been done on how you could use a fast rail network as a catalyst for that growth. So the fast rail strategy will, for the first time, really provide that comprehensive assessment around connecting our regional cities and using connectivity as a catalyst for that growth. So we want to work across government, recognising that fast rail is just one of the enablers for that to happen. We want to make sure that we're working across government, particularly with the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, to ensure that we maximise the benefits across regional New South Wales. We also understand that it can really bring our regional economies closer together, so not just businesses and people, but helping to grow regional economies overall, and domestic and international markets, and help free up road and rail capacity as well for freight, so helping to take some of the passenger demand off our existing routes and help enable some of that capacity to be used more efficiently for freight. In terms of our communities, we also want to see regional communities thrive, and that really leverages off the great quality of life that regional communities currently enjoy. So already people living in regional areas, and we know this from various studies, that they enjoy more affordable housing, better quality of life, and the social benefits that come from living in some of those smaller, closer-knit communities, as well as great access to some of our state's best natural assets as well. So better connections will help open up the benefits of this regional lifestyle and attract more people. And together with investment in education, digital connectivity, which we know is a big issue in many parts of the state, and social infrastructure, these regional hubs will increasingly become much more attractive places to work if they're better connected to some of our global gateways and bigger cities. And then lastly, around great regional places. So better connections between these centres provide that opportunity to open up housing in support of housing affordability, but also through strategic and land use planning to help make some of those fast rail hubs much more active and vibrant precincts. Being the real focal point for those regional centres, the active precincts around fast rail hubs will complement existing town and city centres and help stimulate the local economy and amenity. They also become gateways to some of our most beautiful natural environments, like I mentioned, and that helps to attract greater tourism to regional New South Wales, where connectivity is currently a big barrier in attracting people out of Sydney. So this improved connectivity will help unlock this potential, helping to grow our visitor economy, and we want to see those regional places thrive as a result. So these three key themes are really at the core of what we are looking at for Fast Rail. But helping underpin all of this is really looking at the customer and looking at the customer at the centre of Fast Rail. And we want to make sure that our country customers are really at the centre and make sure that Fast Rail becomes a safe, reliable, fast and effortless way to travel across our regions. Making sure that it becomes the mode of choice, not just for our existing customers and communities, but also trying to attract some of the markets that perhaps we don't typically attract around business and tourism. So we've already started some customer research around this. Earlier in the year, we've undertaken a lot of customer insight research and focus groups, and that's building off the wealth of information we currently have already within Transport for New South Wales. And that's helping to inform what Fast Rail looks like, not just necessarily from a technical perspective, but from a customer-facing perspective. So what is the Fast Rail product we want to offer, and how does that differ from what we have today? And then where the networks will come together within Greater Sydney is clearly a key issue that we're working through. And that connection, and not just the entry points, but those fast rail connections, the fast rail interchanges with our mass transit network. So we want to look at where the key growth centres are within Greater Sydney and really leverage off the vision of three cities. So not necessarily focusing as strongly as we have in the past on the eastern city, where Central is today, but looking at the opportunities further west in our Central River City. So we really want to look at opportunities to leverage the existing, so the Sydney Trains network and the emerging Sydney Metro network, as a way of doing the heavy lifting within Greater Sydney. So a staged approach to delivery. So unlike, I suppose, past schemes where there's been a traditional big bang, long sections of very fast high-speed rail, we're actually looking at this again very differently, and Melissa will touch on this. Essentially what we're looking to achieve is incremental improvements in the short to medium term that really focus on upgrading our existing infrastructure to match the performance capabilities of the fleet that we're procuring. So the new intercity fleet along the electrical network, as well as the new regional fleet, which will be hybrid but operating across the state. So these will form the building blocks of a dedicated, faster network that will be delivered over the long term with potential speeds of up to 250 kilometres an hour and above. This means that the early stages can integrate with our existing network, but also, more importantly, can deliver improvements and benefits for our customers in the short to medium term. And while do so, we can step towards that long-term vision as part of our plan. So we want to make sure that we're leaving the door open for the future and paving the way for innovation, but also safeguarding for some of those opportunities that might eventuate down the track. So in terms of next steps, so like I mentioned, we're really focused this year on working and finalising the Fast Rail strategy, which is the overarching network vision or the network blueprint, and complementing that is our corridor investigations or early works across the network. This is really just the start, and the New South Wales Government is committed to move from strategy into planning and delivery. So there's an initial investment of $295 million already over the next 4 years to start to see this happen. Of this, $80 million has been allocated to develop a new rail alignment between Northern Sydney and Woy Woy. So we're looking at tunnelling options out of Greater Sydney, as well as how to cross the Hawkesbury River. There's also 125 million allocated down to the south coast between Kaima and Bomaderry, $80 million to look at straightening the alignment between Mittagong and Yerrinbal as part of a Sydney corridor route, as well as $10 million for the Central West as well, so how can we optimise the current rail corridor out to our west, including options for crossing the Blue Mountains. So really this is just the start of Fast Rail for New South Wales, and as I mentioned, we've already got new fleet coming. What we want to do is complement that with improvements to our infrastructure. So we're proposing to start engaging with stakeholders much more broadly from 2020 onwards as part of our broader program of work. And with Fast Rail, we have the opportunity to really transform connectivity across New South Wales. And while we step from strategy to planning and delivery of the first phase in the coming years, really think about going beyond that, going to 5 years, to 10 years, to 20 plus years, and reimagining what Fast Rail could look like as part of our plan. So think about the possibilities of what Fast Rail could do, and not just necessarily for our network, but thinking about it from the perspective of our people and our places. And now Melissa will start to talk about our technical challenges and how we're doing things differently.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I'm chartered civil engineer, and for me it's a great pleasure to look after the technical aspect of Fast Rail. Working. So, as Graham mentioned, when we started this job, I was asked numerous times in different industry forums, what are we doing differently? Is there really any force behind that work that we are doing at the moment? And I must actually remind all of you that you know in rail industry and transport industry, big programs are usually dwelling around 40 or 50 years before they came to fruition. So as we know, everything started in 1980s in Australia, and now is the time to start building the regions and connect us. So Graham was talking about strategic layer of whole our program, and he is working really tirelessly with all stakeholders, predominantly in different parts of our government. I'd like to use this opportunity and to thank you actually operators and maintainers who are current operators and maintainers in our state is Sydney Trains, New South Wales Train Link, Sydney Metro, and other colleagues from different divisions in our own organisation, and also technical advisors who helped us all the way to develop this program to the stage where we are at the moment. Graham mentioned about connectivity, and I would only say very, very briefly that we are aware about integration. This is the basic of our program. We are thinking about hub and spoke, which is underpinning our groundstone strategy, which is future transport for 2056. We are thinking about multimodal integration. Doesn't matter how strong we are in rail space, we are aware that our customer is center of everything, and for customer is important very first and very last mile in their journey from their home to places of interest or work. So what is really different in this time? Graham mentioned stage delivery, but I can't go around comparison between roads and rail. And as you know, they've been building for many, many decades loops, deviations, future-proven, which are they connecting in the end to beautiful highway. If you look to the north of our state, and if you look to the corridor between Sydney and Newcastle, you will see, and further north, you will see three roads corridors in last century. However, we have one rail corridor which was designed and built in 19th century and supposed to serve customer from 21st. So it is really the time for thinking about fast rail and upgrading. So in this stage delivery, we applied certain methodology. So we said we would have a range of corridor improvements for the corridors which are taking care about speed of up to 160 kilometers an hour. We would take care about next tranche or next family of options. We would which would cover speed between 160 to 200, and further from 200 to 250, and beyond 250, which would be certainly towards high-speed rail. So all detailed staging would be done in next stages and predominantly in reference design and prior to further procurement. The other point, what we are doing differently is actually taking into account freight interfaces. We are very much aware about our economy. We are aware that freight is sharing our corridors almost everywhere. And we would like to have not only new timetables and higher frequencies for freight, we would like also to reduce travel times for freight rail, if that would be possible. We would like to improve passengers' experience, but also freight operators targeting the time of deliveries. And that would inevitably lead to improving employment accessibilities, to growing the economy, to growing, of course, housing accessibility, supply, affordability, which is something that this government is really thinking about. The third point, and that we are doing slightly differently this time around, is certainly very early applications of system engineering. As you know, it's easy to apply system engineering when you go to detailed design and delivery. However, all around the world, numerous studies have been done how much we are saving if we apply system engineering rigor from day one, an embryonic stage of investment. So we started to do everything in accordance with big V, verification, approving and ensuring that everything is done in accordance to the standards, and validation that product that we are developing is actually what customer needs. We are also developed from very beginning all different products in system engineering to straighten up that strategic vision up to delivery. And our major product is certainly business requirement specification, which is covering client needs. We are always mindful about whole life of cost. The last point that we did slightly differently is about United Nations Strategic Development Goals. As you might be aware, the whole engineering around the world is repositioning to prove and ensure that SDGs are covered. This is something which will improve life on this planet. You might see in project objectives in future transport for 2056. I am aware that we are running a little bit of time, and I don't want to dwell long about that. Our option development process is very thorough. We are trying to involve absolutely everything from the very beginning. We are spending some time in problem space. We would like to be sure that each and any stakeholder is involved and each and any point of view is taken in account. We start with very broad range of options. We have strategic merit tests and the other ways how we are sifting to short list of options. Options that are considered so far are designed to respond to project scope and to be consistent with guidance from Australian Transport and Planning guidelines, as well as Infrastructure New South Wales Gate 1 workbook. So we are having short to medium term, as it mentioned, and this is actually a list of potential deviations or amplifications along the corridor, taking in account, of course, existing stations, existing alignment, and we have a definition of low and high scenarios, which is actually covering minimum required of infrastructure improvement to the bigger deviations. We also have this other medium to long-term set of options, and they are exploring new fast rail alignment, which will be eventually joined one day in high-speed alignment if it would be required. We have numerous technical challenges, as you can imagine and you already know. We have areas within the existing rail corridor, which require development and very close working relationship with freight and passenger operators and maintainers. And we need to certainly mitigate the risk of possessions when we are in existing corridor. On the other hand, if we are outside of existing corridor, we have areas which are as national parks, nature reserves, or big river crossings. And this is actually causing considerable environmental and access challenges which we have to be aware. So as Graham mentioned about those corridors and what would be the first steps, certainly Sydney to Newcastle is a very interesting corridor because topography is very challenging. Horizontal alignment is passing through national parks and crossing mighty Hawkesbury River. Vertical alignment is having one of the steepest grades in our country, and we are trying to think about that. Sydney to Canberra is having slightly different challenges. Topography is not very challenging, but however we have, of course, environmental risks, which are national parks, and we have very major utilities crossing as water, New South Wales Upper Canal, or Sydney to Moomba gas pipeline, or Vigingambi Reservoir. I will be quick. So we are coming to Sydney to Central West not only to enjoy in your beautiful part of the country. We are also aware that one of the biggest challenges for technical side of our job is certainly Blue Mountains and Great Dividing Range. We are aware about zigzag tunnels and all that beautiful innovations from 19th century, but we would like actually to upgrade and optimize existing route, and of course it would be new fleet and it would be services which will match those improvements. Sydney to Nara is very interesting because it's having other challenges which are topography. And the major is certainly that environmental and topographical challenge. When I was talking about all these corridors, I didn't mention any particular project because all of you know what is the crunch in each and any corridor, and I didn't mention travel time, which is also very important regarding to distances and comparison to traveling on roads. Thank you very much.